This year, 2026, is shaping up to be the most consequential year in modern luxury history, not for innovation or sales records, but for restrictions, reviews, and outright bans. Across 3 continents, governments are taking unprecedented action against the world's most prestigious brands. Cultural councils are questioning whether iconic designs belong in public spaces. Consumer protection agencies are investigating marketing practices once considered untouchable. Municipal authorities are drafting ordinances, targeting everything from billboard sizes to product release strategies. This isn't about counterfeit goods or tax evasion. These are formal regulatory actions targeting the very essence of how luxury brands operate: their advertising, their scarcity tactics, their visual identities, even their creative expression. Most of these bans remain pending, caught in committee hearings, public comment periods, and legal challenges. But the momentum is undeniable. Millions of consumers are watching. Industry insiders are nervous, and the brands themselves are scrambling to respond before enforcement begins. What follows is the story of 15 luxury houses facing an uncertain future, caught between heritage and regulation, creativity and control, in a year that could redefine luxury forever. Gucci is fighting for its creative freedom as consumer protection agencies across 3 continents launch coordinated investigations into what they're calling deliberately confusing marketing practices. The Italian brand, known for its surrealist campaigns and boundary-pushing advertisements, now faces the possibility of mandatory content restrictions and substantial fines. The trouble began in February 2026, when the European Consumer Protection Board received complaints about Gucci's latest campaign, featuring models in what appeared to be ordinary street clothes alongside luxury items, with no clear price differentiation or product identification. Regulators claim the campaign intentionally blurred the line between attainable and luxury goods, potentially misleading consumers about what they were actually purchasing. By March, similar investigations had been opened in the United States by the Federal Trade Commission and in Japan by the Consumer Affairs Agency. The pending restrictions under consideration are severe. Draft proposals obtained by fashion journalists suggest Gucci could be required to include clear product labels, pricing tiers, and material disclosures in all advertising materials. Some proposals even mention mandatory waiting periods between campaign approval and public release, giving regulators time to review content for compliance. Industry insiders are sounding alarm bells. If these restrictions pass, they argue, the precedent would fundamentally alter how luxury brands communicate with consumers. Gucci submitted a formal response to regulators in early April, arguing that artistic expression and commercial speech are being unfairly conflated. The brand maintains that consumers understand the aspirational nature of fashion advertising. Public hearings are scheduled for May, with preliminary decisions expected by July. The outcome could either preserve creative latitude for luxury marketing or usher in a new era of regulated messaging across the industry. But the scrutiny even reaches the most recognizable logo in fashion history, one that authorities now claim has gone too far: Louis Vuitton. The Louis Vuitton monogram, those interlocking LV letters that have adorned bags, luggage, and accessories for over a century, is now at the center of an unprecedented cultural reckoning. In March 2026, cultural councils in Paris, Milan, and New York simultaneously announced they were reviewing the brand's omnipresence in public spaces, citing concerns over what they're calling logo saturation syndrome. The movement began quietly in January, when the Parisian Arts and Culture Committee received over 15,000 citizen complaints about the visual dominance of luxury advertising in the city's historic districts. Louis Vuitton, with its flagship stores, massive billboard campaigns, and pop-up installations, became the primary target. By February, the committee had drafted preliminary guidelines that could limit the size, frequency, and placement of monogram displays in designated cultural zones. Museum directors across Europe have joined the conversation. The Louvre and the Victoria and Albert Museum both announced in early April that they're conducting internal reviews of their Louis Vuitton-sponsored exhibitions, with pending decisions on whether such partnerships constitute inappropriate commercial influence. The brand's artistic collaborations, once celebrated as the intersection of commerce and culture, are now being scrutinized as potential violations of institutional integrity. Louis Vuitton has remained largely silent, though sources inside LVMH suggest the company is preparing a formal response. Industry analysts predict that if cultural restrictions are implemented in major cities, other luxury brands could face similar scrutiny. The final decision, expected by late June, could reshape luxury branding forever. If Louis Vuitton's crime is overexposure, another brand faces restrictions on the designs themselves before they even reach consumers. Balenciaga's provocative aesthetic, the very quality that made it a cultural phenomenon, may become its legal liability. Throughout early 2026, civic authorities in France, Italy, the United Kingdom, and several U.S. states have been reviewing whether certain runway designs constitute public disturbances or violations of decency standards when displayed in commercial contexts. The current controversy traces back to Balenciaga's Fall 2026 presentation in Paris this past January, where models wore designs featuring extreme silhouettes, politically charged imagery, and what some observers described as deliberately disturbing conceptual pieces. Within days, cultural heritage committees in 3 countries had opened formal inquiries. By March, the Italian Ministry of Cultural Heritage had requested that Balenciaga submit future collections for pre-approval before any public runway showing in Milan. The brand now finds itself in an impossible position. Creative director Demna has built Balenciaga's identity on challenging conventional taste and provoking conversation. But pending legislation in multiple jurisdictions could require luxury brands to certify that their public displays meet community standards, a deliberately vague term that has fashion insiders terrified. In April, Balenciaga began the unprecedented step of submitting design sketches and concept boards to government cultural boards for preliminary review, hoping to avoid potential bans before garments are even produced. Legal experts note this represents a fundamental shift in the relationship between state authority and creative expression. The next major decision point comes in June, when the French Cultural Council will announce whether Balenciaga's upcoming resort collection can be shown publicly in Paris or must be restricted to private, industry-only viewings. Balenciaga's provocation may be intentional, but Prada's intellectual experimentation is being penalized for entirely different reasons. Prada's avant-garde collections, long celebrated in fashion circles as intellectual provocations, are now being classified by cultural authorities as potentially harmful to public sensibilities. Since February 2026, cultural preservation boards in Italy, France, and Belgium have been reviewing what they term Prada's extreme experimental pieces for possible exclusion from publicly funded exhibitions and museum displays. The controversy centers on Prada's Spring 2026 collection, which featured deconstructed garments, unconventional materials, and designs that challenged traditional notions of wearability. Cultural ministry officials in Milan argue that these pieces, when displayed in public institutions, may confuse or distress visitors expecting conventional fashion exhibitions. By March, the Italian Cultural Heritage Committee had drafted guidelines suggesting that excessively experimental fashion requires special contextual framing or age restrictions. Designers across the industry have rallied to Prada's defense, with over 200 creative directors signing an open letter in March condemning what they call aesthetic regulation. They argue that fashion's role has always been to challenge, provoke, and push boundaries. Prada has responded strategically, commissioning independent cultural scholars to provide expert testimony on the historical importance of experimental fashion. The brand has also begun offering contextualized viewing experiences at its own galleries, attempting to preempt regulatory concerns. The crucial decision comes in late May, when the European Cultural Council will vote on whether experimental fashion requires the same content warnings and viewing restrictions currently applied to contemporary art installations. The precedent could fundamentally alter how fashion is displayed publicly. If experimental fashion is under attack, classic designs face an ironic threat of their own, being too timeless. Chanel, In an ironic twist, Chanel's devotion to its heritage may become its greatest liability. Government arts councils in France and Italy are currently debating legislation that would restrict luxury brands from repeatedly reissuing classic designs, arguing that such practices stifle innovation and reduce fashion to mere commercial repetition rather than cultural advancement. The proposed regulations, introduced in the French National Assembly in March 2026, would limit how frequently brands can release substantially identical versions of signature pieces. Under the pending framework, items like the Chanel 255 bag, the tweed jacket, and the classic quilted designs could face display restrictions at state-sponsored fashion events and publicly funded retail spaces if released without significant creative evolution. Proponents argue that fashion deserves the same protections as other art forms. Just as museums are expected to showcase innovation rather than endless reproductions, they contend that luxury fashion should be held to progressive, creative standards. The French Ministry of Culture released a statement in April, noting that true luxury lies in advancement, not in nostalgia. Chanel has mounted a vigorous defense, arguing that its classic pieces represent living design traditions rather than stagnant reproductions. The brand commissioned legal scholars to prepare briefs comparing its reissues to architectural preservation and classical music performance, both of which honor tradition without being labeled regressive. Public hearings are scheduled throughout May, with the French Cultural Council expected to issue preliminary rulings by mid-June. If passed, the restrictions could force Chanel to either radically reimagine its signature pieces or face limitations on where and how they can be publicly displayed and sold. While Chanel confronts restrictions on what it shows, Dior is under review for how it shows it. Dior's ethereal advertising campaigns, featuring impossibly slender models in dreamlike settings, are now the subject of legislative action across multiple countries. In January 2026, health advocacy groups successfully petitioned lawmakers in France, the UK, and California to draft regulations specifically targeting what they call digitally manipulated beauty ideals in luxury advertising. The pending legislation, currently moving through committee stages, would require brands to disclose all digital retouching and meet specific body diversity quotas in their campaigns. Dior's recent fragrance and ready-to-wear advertisements have been cited repeatedly in parliamentary hearings as examples of imagery that perpetuates harmful beauty standards, particularly among young women. By March, the French National Assembly's Health Committee had produced a draft bill requiring luxury brands to submit advertising materials for pre-approval by a newly created Beauty Standards Review Board. Under the proposed framework, campaigns failing to meet diversity and authenticity benchmarks could be banned from billboards, magazines, and digital platforms until modifications are made. Dior responded in April with a public statement emphasizing its commitment to beauty in all forms, but stopped short of committing to the specific changes regulators are demanding. The controversy has split the fashion world. Some industry veterans argue that aspirational imagery is fundamental to luxury marketing, while younger creatives increasingly advocate for realistic representation. If the proposal is passed, Dior could face immediate requirements to recall current advertisements and modify future campaigns before release. Legal experts suggest the brand is preparing lawsuits, challenging the regulations on free speech grounds, setting up a landmark battle between commerce and public health policy. Beyond the content of advertisements lies another battleground, where luxury brands can display them at all. Versace's signature maximalist aesthetic, bold Medusa logos, vibrant colors, and larger-than-life imagery has collided with emerging urban planning regulations. Since February 2026, city councils in Milan, Paris, London, and New York have been developing ordinances that would strictly limit the size and placement of luxury brand advertisements in historic and residential districts. The movement gained momentum when Milan's city council received petitions from residents' associations, claiming that massive Versace billboards and pop-up installations were destroying the visual character of heritage neighborhoods. By March, the council had drafted the Visual Harmony Protection Act, which specifically names Versace's recent campaign installations as examples of commercial excess incompatible with public space integrity. Pending enforcement could be devastating for the brand's marketing strategy. The proposed restrictions would ban outdoor advertisements larger than 3 square meters in designated zones, prohibit LED and digital displays within 500 meters of historic sites, and require special permits for any temporary brand installations. Versace's planned summer pop-up store in central Milan, a glass pavilion featuring floor-to-ceiling brand imagery, has been indefinitely delayed pending council approval. Other major cities are watching closely. Paris announced in April that it would conduct a 6-month review of all luxury advertising in the Marais and Saint-Germain districts, with Versace's existing installations subject to immediate evaluation. London's planning authority has imposed a temporary moratorium on new luxury brand outdoor advertising, while it develops similar guidelines. Versace has hired urban planning consultants and cultural heritage lawyers to fight the restrictions, arguing that fashion advertising contributes to urban vitality rather than detracting from it. The brand submitted alternative proposals in late April, suggesting smaller-scale, architecturally integrated displays. The first major decision comes in early June, when Milan votes on its ordinance. If passed, implementation would begin immediately, forcing Versace to dismantle existing installations within 90 days. If Versace's visibility is the problem, Hermès faces the opposite accusation, hiding products from consumers who want to buy them. Hermès. The legendary scarcity of Hermès Birkin bags, once considered a brilliant marketing strategy, is now under investigation by international trade regulators who suspect the practice may violate consumer protection laws. In March 2026, the European Commission's Trade and Consumer Affairs Division opened a formal inquiry into whether Hermès deliberately restricts supply to artificially inflate prices and manipulate market demand. The investigation followed years of consumer complaints about the brand's opaque allocation system. Customers reported being told that coveted bags were unavailable, only to see them appear in stores days later for clients with stronger purchase histories. By April, regulatory authorities in France, Italy, and the United States had joined the inquiry, requesting internal communications and supply chain documentation from Hermès. Draft proposals suggest requiring the brand to publish production numbers, implement transparent waitlist systems, and justify price increases with documented cost changes. Most controversially, regulators are considering rules that would prohibit brands from requiring customers to purchase other items before accessing high-demand products, a practice Hermès has long been accused of employing. Hermès has responded cautiously, emphasizing that its products are handcrafted by skilled artisans, naturally limiting supply. However, leaked internal documents obtained by investigators reportedly show deliberate production limitations for items where demand far exceeds manufacturing constraints. Industry observers note that if Hermès is forced to implement radical transparency, the mystique surrounding the brand could evaporate, potentially affecting its luxury positioning. Preliminary findings are expected in July, with potential enforcement actions to follow. Scarcity as a marketing tool is under fire, but so is market dominance itself. Rolex. Rolex's global dominance in luxury timepieces has attracted unwanted attention from government trade officials concerned about market concentration and wealth inequality. Since January 2026, multiple countries have been exploring import restrictions and sales quotas designed to limit the flow of ultra-luxury watches into their markets. The initiative began in Switzerland, ironically Rolex's home country, where parliamentary members introduced legislation in February that would cap the number of luxury watches any single brand could export annually. Proponents argue that excessive luxury goods exports contribute to global wealth disparities, and that Switzerland should take moral leadership in moderating conspicuous consumption. By March, the proposal had gained unexpected support across the political spectrum. Progressive lawmakers emphasized inequality concerns, while conservatives focused on protecting Switzerland's broader manufacturing base from being overshadowed by luxury goods. The pending quota system would limit Rolex exports by 15% annually, with the stated goal of encouraging diversification in Swiss industry. China, historically a massive market for Rolex, quietly implemented new customs procedures in March that have effectively slowed luxury watch imports to a trickle. While officially described as anti-money laundering measures, industry insiders recognize them as deliberate market controls. Rolex has maintained public silence while reportedly lobbying vigorously behind closed doors. The Swiss Watchmakers Association filed formal objections in April, warning that such restrictions could devastate the country's most successful industry. The critical decision point arrives in June when Switzerland's parliament votes on the export quota legislation. If passed, implementation could begin as early as September. While Rolex fights to maintain its global reach, another heritage brand is battling to keep control of its most iconic design: Burberry. Burberry's iconic check pattern, synonymous with British heritage for over a century, has become the subject of an unprecedented cultural identity investigation. In February 2026, the UK's newly formed Cultural Heritage Protection Committee launched a review examining whether luxury brands can claim exclusive ownership of patterns deemed part of national cultural identity. The inquiry was triggered by complaints from Scottish heritage groups, arguing that Burberry's Tartangent-inspired designs appropriate traditional clan patterns for commercial profit. By March, the committee had expanded its scope to examine whether Burberry's check pattern itself had transcended brand identity to become a recognizable symbol of British culture that should exist in the public domain. Pending restrictions under consideration would prevent Burberry from displaying its signature pattern at state-sponsored events, government buildings, and publicly funded cultural institutions. More drastically, proposals suggest the pattern could be reclassified as cultural heritage rather than trademarked intellectual property, potentially opening it to wider public use. The Fashion Council has joined the debate, with Heritage England announcing in April that it was reviewing whether Burberry garments in museum collections should be reclassified from brand artifacts to cultural textiles. This seemingly technical distinction would prevent Burberry from controlling how the pieces are displayed or referenced. Burberry has mounted an aggressive defense, arguing that brand heritage and national heritage are distinct categories. The company commissioned legal scholars to document how its investment in design innovation created the pattern's cultural significance rather than merely appropriating existing traditions. The controversy has sparked fierce public debate. Working-class communities who adopted the Burberry check as unofficial uniform in the 1990s argue it belongs to them as much as to the brand. Fashion historians counter that diluting trademark protections would eliminate incentives for design innovation. The Cultural Heritage Protection Committee will issue preliminary findings in June, with potential enforcement beginning in September. The precedent could affect how all heritage brands protect their signature designs. Burberry's check pattern faces cultural reclassification, but Fendi confronts an even stranger paradox, being penalized for subtlety. Fendi's quiet luxury aesthetic, subtle branding, and understated elegance has paradoxically attracted regulatory scrutiny for what authorities call insidious wealth signaling. Since March 2026, consumer protection boards across Europe have been examining whether minimalist luxury advertising psychologically manipulates consumers into excessive spending by making wealth appear effortless and natural. The investigation centers on Fendi's recent campaigns, featuring models in seemingly simple settings, wearing items whose astronomical prices are never mentioned. Regulatory psychologists testified before the European Consumer Affairs Commission in April, arguing that such advertising is more manipulative than overt displays of wealth, because it presents luxury consumption as casual and necessary, rather than exceptional and aspirational. Draft regulations obtained by industry publications suggest authorities may require luxury brands to include price disclosures in all advertising materials and limit the use of lifestyle imagery that portrays products as everyday items. Fendi's minimalist campaigns showing bags casually placed in homes, worn during routine activities, are cited as primary examples of prohibited practices. The pending ban would restrict Fendi's outdoor advertising in major European cities and require significant modifications to digital campaigns. Most controversially, proposals suggest that brands practicing quiet luxury marketing should face stricter regulations than those with obvious logos, since subtle wealth display is considered more psychologically harmful. Fendi released a statement in April expressing confusion about being penalized for restraint, noting that regulators have simultaneously criticized other brands for excessive logo display. The company argues that minimalist design represents artistic evolution, not manipulation. Fashion industry groups have rallied behind Fendi, warning that regulating aesthetic choices sets dangerous precedents. However, consumer advocacy organizations counter that. Protecting vulnerable buyers from psychological manipulation justifies intervention. Public comment periods close in May, with preliminary rulings expected by early July. The outcome will determine whether understated luxury faces greater restrictions than its ostentatious counterpart. If quiet luxury draws suspicion, so does aesthetic borrowing from history itself. Givenchy's Gothic-inspired monograms and dark romantic aesthetic are under review by cultural authorities concerned about the commercialization of historical design elements. In January 2026, France's National Heritage Commission opened an investigation into whether luxury brands inappropriately exploit historical artistic movements for commercial gain. The inquiry specifically targets Givenchy's use of neo-Gothic typography, Victorian-inspired imagery, and architectural motifs in its branding and retail environments. By March, the Commission had drafted guidelines suggesting that brands using culturally significant historical aesthetics should pay licensing fees to cultural preservation funds or face restrictions on public display. Pending regulations would limit Givenchy's ability to use its signature Gothic-style logo on storefront facades in historic districts, arguing that the commercial use of such imagery dilutes genuine historical architecture. The brand's flagship stores in Paris and Rome have been cited as locations where pastiche Gothic elements create visual confusion with authentic period buildings. More broadly, the investigation questions whether any brand can claim ownership of aesthetic languages drawn from historical art movements. If implemented, the framework would require luxury houses to demonstrate that their brand identities represent genuine creative innovation rather than historical appropriation. Givenchy responded in April by commissioning art historians to document how its founder, Hubert de Givenchy, originally synthesized historical influences into a distinct modern vision. The brand argues that all contemporary design builds on historical foundations, and that restricting such references would paralyze creative expression. The fashion community has expressed alarm, recognizing that nearly every luxury brand draws inspiration from historical periods. Saint Laurent's references to the 1970s, Dior's New Look heritage, and Chanel's modernist influences could all face similar scrutiny. Public hearings continue through May, with France's Cultural Heritage Commission expected to issue binding recommendations in June. Implementation could begin immediately, requiring brands to modify storefronts and potentially retire certain logo variations in public contexts. Saint Laurent's moody, melancholic campaigns featuring solitary figures in nocturnal settings have become the target of mental health advocacy groups who successfully lobbied for regulatory review. In February 2026, France's Public Health Ministry announced it would examine whether luxury advertising that associates products with emotional darkness violates emerging psychological well-being standards. The investigation focuses on Saint Laurent's multi-year aesthetic strategy, portraying luxury consumption through lens of isolation, alienation, and brooding introspection. Mental health professionals testified before Parliament in March, arguing that such imagery normalizes depression and associates luxury goods with emotional dysfunction, potentially harmful to vulnerable consumers. Pending regulations would require Saint Laurent to submit future campaigns for psychological impact assessment before release. Draft guidelines suggest that advertising associating products with negative emotional states could be banned from public spaces, restricted to adult-only media channels, or required to include mental health resource information. The brand finds itself in an unusual position. Creative director Anthony Vaccarello has built Saint Laurent's modern identity on sophisticated darkness, a stark contrast to aspirational happiness prevalent in most luxury advertising. The brand argues that acknowledging complex emotional realities represents artistic maturity, not manipulation. Cultural critics have joined the debate. Some argue that sanitizing fashion advertising to exclude anything but positive emotions infantilizes consumers and reduces art to propaganda. Others counter that commercial entities have no right to aestheticize mental health struggles for profit. Saint Laurent submitted formal objections in April, including statements from mental health professionals who argue that diverse emotional representation in media can be therapeutic rather than harmful. The brand emphasized that its campaigns never explicitly encourage negative behaviors. The Public Health Ministry will complete its review in June, with enforcement decisions expected by July. If restrictions pass, Saint Laurent faces the choice of fundamentally altering its creative identity or accepting limited distribution channels for its visual content. Saint Laurent's melancholic aesthetic may be artistic, but Dolce & Gabbana's controversies are being treated as systematic business strategy. Dolce & Gabbana's pattern of courting controversy through provocative campaigns and polarizing partnerships has finally triggered formal regulatory action. In March 2026, the Italian Competition Authority launched an investigation examining whether the brand's repeated scandals constitute a deliberate business strategy that violates fair trading practices. The inquiry follows years of incidents: racially insensitive advertisements, culturally appropriative collections, and partnerships with controversial figures. Regulators argue that Dolce & Gabbana systematically generates outrage to maintain relevance, manipulating public sentiment for commercial gain while avoiding accountability. By April, the investigation had expanded to include the European Commission's Consumer Protection Division and advertising standards boards in 6 countries. The pending enforcement framework would restrict Dolce & Gabbana from engaging celebrity endorsers with controversial public profiles and require pre-approval of campaign concepts deemed potentially offensive. Most significantly, proposals suggest implementing a 3-strike system where brands that repeatedly violate cultural sensitivity standards face escalating penalties, from mandatory public apologies to temporary bans from major fashion weeks and trade events. Dolce & Gabbana has responded defensively, arguing that creative freedom includes the right to be provocative and that consumer boycotts, not government intervention, should determine marketplace consequences for controversial speech. The brand hired constitutional lawyers to prepare free expression defenses. Industry observers note the investigation reflects broader frustration with brands that seemingly apologize for controversies while continuing similar practices. Fashion councils in Milan and Paris have privately indicated support for some regulatory framework, though concerns about censorship remain. The Italian Competition Authority will issue preliminary findings in June, potentially recommending sanctions that could restrict Dolce & Gabbana's participation in major fashion events. The European Commission's parallel investigation continues through summer, with coordinated enforcement possible by September. The brand faces its most serious institutional reckoning yet. From high fashion controversy to streetwear chaos, the final brand facing restrictions operates in an entirely different realm of luxury: Supreme. Supreme's legendary product drops, which regularly cause sidewalk chaos, traffic disruptions, and occasionally violence, are facing coordinated municipal crackdowns. Since January 2026, city governments in New York, Los Angeles, Tokyo, and London have been developing ordinances specifically targeting hype merchandise releases that create public safety hazards. The regulations emerged after a particularly chaotic Supreme drop in New York this past December caused emergency services to close 2 city blocks. By February, the City Council had drafted the Retail Public Safety Act, which would require brands to obtain special permits for limited releases, implement mandatory crowd control measures, and face substantial fines for any incidents. The pending restrictions go further than previous guidelines. Under consideration are requirements that brands disclose release quantities at least 48 hours in advance, implement digital lottery systems to eliminate physical cues, and limit the number of items any individual can purchase. Most drastically, some proposals would ban in-person releases entirely for items where demand is projected to exceed supply by certain ratios. Supreme has pushed back through industry associations, arguing that government micromanagement of retail operations exceeds regulatory authority. The brand contends that enthusiastic customers should not be pathologized and that existing public safety laws adequately address genuine concerns. However, municipalities note that Supreme and similar brands deliberately cultivate artificial scarcity and hype that they know will create dangerous crowds. Internal emails obtained by investigators reportedly show Supreme staff joking about expected chaos at upcoming releases. Other streetwear brands are watching nervously, recognizing that regulations targeting Supreme will inevitably affect them. Sneaker companies like Nike and Adidas have quietly implemented voluntary reforms, hoping to avoid similar restrictions. New York's ordinance faces a crucial vote in late May, with implementation potentially beginning by August. Tokyo and London authorities have indicated they will adopt similar frameworks if New York's passes, creating coordinated global pressure on hype-driven retail strategies. Supreme's chaotic drops represent a fitting end to a year when every aspect of luxury commerce came under unprecedented scrutiny.